Można, tak? Zaczynamy. Dzień dobry Państwu. Witam serdecznie na wykładzie doktora Juricy Pavičicia pod tytułem Genre and Crime Novel in Croatian Literary Fiction and Film, Context and Specific Problems. Jurica Pavičić jest chorwackim filmoznawcą, scenarzystą filmowym, krytykiem literackim, dziennikarzem i powieściopisarzem. To jest pierwsze dzisiaj spotkanie z Juricą Pavičiciem jako filmoznawcą, a drugie spotkanie będzie miało miejsce też tutaj o godzinie 18 i wtedy będziemy mieli okazję poznać Juricę Pavičicia od tej strony twórczości literackiej. Jeżeli chodzi o jego dorobek filmoznawczy, Jurica Pavičić jest autorem 2 monografii naukowych. Pierwsza ukazała się w 2011 roku i powstała na podstawie rozprawy doktorskiej. Książka, która została wydana, nosi tytuł Postjugosłowiański film, styl i ideologia. Druga książka jego w dorobku filmoznawczym to książka wydana w 2017 roku pod tytułem Klasycy chorwackiego filmu w okresie Jugosławii. Także oddaję głos naszemu gościowi i
Hello. When your professor and my translator Leszek Małczak and me were planning this tour, when I'm promoting my just translated crime novel book, Czerwona Woda, one of the ideas was that we do a lecture here at the University at Katowice. And since I'm coming as a writer, since I'm a crime writer, and since I'm coming from Croatia, one of the possible topics of the lecture could be this one: genre and crime novel in Croatian literary fiction and film, context and specific problems, with the idea to put what I'm writing into and what I'm professionally researching into a context of the whole culture. So let's start for some general overview. If you want to have a genre fiction, and particularly crime fiction, if you want to have a scene, if you want to have a stable production, you need several preconditions which are necessary for that. First of these preconditions is this pool of readers, which means you have demographics. You need enough big demographics, I mean not too small country. Certain literacy rate, which means enough people who read anyway, and certain level of urbanization. Second precondition you would require is market-orienting publishing industry, which responds to interest of the audience for a specific genre, and answer to this interest by encouraging people to write such books, publishing that books, promoting that books, and selling the books as a mean of the capitalist economy. Also, for having a genre and crime novel, you would require certain ideological and economic preconditions. First of all, urban setting, because crime novel is most often urban genre. It's a genre which often takes place in the city and deals with the urban modernized society. You would require certain confidence into institutions. When we're talking about crime novel, we're talking about police, we are talking about courts, we are talking about attorneys, like certain institutions of the established modern society, which people have confidence into such an institutions. And if you're talking about literature, that's it. But if you're talking about cinema, you would require even more. You would require cinema industry. And cinema industry means at least 2 things. One of them is technical infrastructure. Studios, cameras, lighting, equipment, which means a big, especially for early 20th century, it's a big, quite an expensive infrastructure, and skills, and we're talking about skills in cinema. there are obvious things that you would come in mind. You would think about, okay, you need to have a guy who is able to operate with camera. You need a guy who is able to record the sound. You need someone who would be able to light the scene. But beneath that, there is another type of the skills. Skill of someone who is supposed to direct the film. Skills of someone who is capable of writing that film, making a screenplay, dramaturgs, screenwriters. So there's a whole level of skills you would need to at least think about making a crime film or thriller film. In Croatia, until the second half of the 20th century, there was no such preconditions, none of them. First of all, population was relatively small. Croatia is even now a country with less than 4 million people, so the population was relatively small. That population was not, that population was population with a high illiteracy rate. At certain areas, especially, let's say, Dalmatian hinterland on some parts of the, where up to the, in the 20s was up to the 60%. So, urbanization was very small. Limited urbanization was limited until the 1945, the beginning of the socialism. Croatia was 90% rural country with very few urban population, and that urban population was very much not speaking Croatian, which means they were either Italians on the littoral, especially in Istria and Rijeka and Zadar. They were either Jewish, German, Czech population in the cities in the north. Urban population who would be oriented to read Croatian literature was relatively small and consisted mainly of the enlightened, patriotic national elite. This is not the audience you are going to gain, make them read crime novels. This is not exactly the audience you would target with thrillers or genre. Urban middle class who would buy books on Croatian for pleasure was very limited until maybe 30s or even 50s and 60s. For that reason, publishing industry in Croatia was at that period not a real capitalist enterprise. It was a project of national enlightenment. It was either attached to political projects, political parties, political movements, patriotic movements, or it was very highbrow in a way that, oh, now we should have a proper modernist literature, then in a way that we catch up with the French, with the Germans, with those who have a really advanced literary scene. In both of that motivations would not take you to write crime novels. None of them. So, if you add that low urbanization, distrust of institutions, as a typical post-colonial, at that period you would say colonial society, Croatia had distrust in institutions because the institutions were foreign. They were German, Hungarian, so that idea of distrust. This is the reason why in Croatian culture there is such a strong appreciation and such a strong affinity for lawbreakers. Only take the names of the sport clubs, Hajduk, Uskok. You have always these people who are breaking laws. They are suddenly become football clubs and rowing clubs have a name upper name. So in that situation, you would not write a police novel. So all this context was very much against the idea of having a crime novel. In cinema, it was even worse because cinema needs huge, serious capitalist infrastructure, which is obviously inexistent in the first half of the 20th century. In Croatia, if you're talking about something you would call, ironically, film industry, you would have only some very timid pioneering attempts. One of them was related to propaganda films of the so-called Agency for People Health, Škola narodnog zdravlja, in the 20s and 30s, or in the Second War as a Nazi state propaganda, or Ustaše state propaganda, which took a German staff infrastructure and and use it for make propaganda films, journals, stuff like this. One of the tasks of the resistance in Zagreb in that period was to dig a hole into the Hrvatski slikopis that, and at some point when the partisans went to Zagreb, to preserve the equipment, to keep it to be used later after the Second War for a new cinematography, for a new cinema industry, and which is something they did. So before, after 1945 starts the process of real creation of cinema industry almost out of nowhere, ex nihilo. With very few people who knew how to really shoot a film, direct the film, write the film, light up the film, edit the film. So it was kind of unknown territory with very few people who had any kind of experience with it. Sorry. In that case, crime novel was very rare in the first half of the 20th century, and I think if you study in Croatian, you won't be surprised to see that the woman who was at the beginning of that is a woman who is fascinating in many ways. It is Marija Jurić Zagorka, first Croatian woman journalist. She was in late Austrian period. She was a parliamentary correspondent of the big Zagreb daily. All people in her newspapers hated her because they were misogynist, but they couldn't help to keep her because she was the only one who speak fluently Hungarian. So they have to live with it with her being a correspondent, and she was a very important journalist, parliamentary correspondent. She was a very popular populist genre writer, writing enormously popular historic novels with lots of swashbuckle, plot twists, love stories, swords, a bit like a more sentimental, more sentimental, less serious version of, let's say, novels of Henryk Sienkiewicz here. And she was enormously popular. She published that novels. She published it as in newspapers in the weekly. Every week, every chapter. It was something that was tremendously popular. And as a part of her, and she was extremely loathed and hated by the colleagues. If you you could take the whole canon of the important Croatian writers, starting from Matoš to Miroslav Krleža, who always all treated her like a trash. She's a awful writer. They really hated her. And one of the things she did was that she published the first Croatian crime novel. It's Kneginja iz Petrinjske ulice, Duchess from Petrinjska Street, 1910. It was typical English-style murder mystery, only taking place in Zagreb and having a local plot with local characters, which is not always the case with the early crime novels in Eastern Europe. Things in literature didn't change much after the Second World War. After the Second World War, you had a certain pool of audience, urbanization, you have a literacy rate in which increased and it became almost absolute in the 50s and 60s, but genre was still kind of the pastiche, typically it was ironic appropriation of the tropes, of the names, of the toponyms, of the whole setting of the English murder mysteries, which were at that time, that was the idea of the crime novel. They were published mainly in paperback magazines, sold on the newsstands. And the writers, which is also interesting, typically had foreign pseudonyms. They were trying to sell their novels as if they were made by Westerners. One of the good examples is Timothy Touch, which is a fake name of the Zagreb writer and translator whose name was Nenad Briksi. And Serbian example, I'm putting always the Serbian examples because at that period it was difficult to distinguish. It was a pseudonym of the name whose nom de plume was Frederick Ashton, and his real name was Mitar Milosevic, and he published a whole series of very popular novels with the main character called Loon, King of Midnight. Look like kind of the James Bond lookalike on a Croatian way. And you have these two covers of their books. This Mrtvacima Ulanjen, the Entrance Forbidden to the Dead, was like a huge bestseller, sold in 40,000 samples in Yugoslavia at that period. They were, when we were preparing this conversation, Leszek and I find out that to a certain amount, this kind of the writing crime novels, which is not set locally but set in England, existed even in here. To a certain way, we found out that Stanislav Lem, a famous science fiction writer from Poland, had written this in the late 50s that crime novel. It was an investigation. How is it? Siedlo. No, the other one from the 50s. Śledztwo, which was set in London. So I found out that there is a certain trend, similar trend even here, and also this trend was, to a certain extent, a result of the general idea, general presumption that in almost crimeless society, it's impossible to write a crime novel. It was a typical argument: how would you write a crime novel here when the only murder is someone is butchering someone with the axe in the village by the plot when he's drunk? There is no elaborated murder. So it's just kind of the idea that you're living in an almost crimeless society when the crime is not only on the drinking peasants or something like that. I think that's a silly argument, in my opinion. It's a silly argument. If you're talking about crime novel, the quality of the crime novel does not depend on the amount of crime in a certain society. If it was so, the biggest crime writer would be from El Salvador. Allegedly, El Salvador is the most violent country in the world, with the biggest murder percentage per capita in general. But it's not. I mean, I presume that many of you have read some Icelandic crime novel. They're very popular, Icelandic crime novel, or Nordic generally, but especially Icelandic. I once did an investigation, and I found out there is a bigger probability that you are going to be a crime writer from Iceland and be translated into English in that year than you are going to be murdered. Because Iceland have 2.5 murders per year, and at least 3 Icelandic crime novels each year are translated into English. So obviously, crime novel scene has nothing. It's not necessarily attached with the violence and the level of crime into society. Otherwise, Nordic noir would exist. I had once a lecture with, promotion with one Norwegian crime novelist, very successful one, Kier Oledal, and he told me that Norway has 14 real murders and 1,400 literary murders every year. So in my opinion, that argument was silly, but that argument was persistent for 20, 25 years within Croatian literature. We cannot have a crime novel. Why? Because we are living in a more or less crimeless society with no real murders, only. At some point, it started to change. Before we are going to see how this started to change, we have to go back to cinema. In cinema, as I told you, the real proper film started with the establishment of the socialist Yugoslavia in 1945, and it started very fast. As you know, by famous quotation by Lenin, for a communist, cinema is the most important industry. It was everywhere like that, in Poland, in Yugoslavia, in Soviet Union. At the very beginning, Yugoslavia starts to create the studio system, which was decentralized, which means that Croatia has its own studio, which was called Jadran Film. This is the building facilities built in the late 40s in Zagreb, in Dubrava, in the eastern suburbs of Zagreb, and started to make all kinds of film, including features. And it became especially important after 1945, when Yugoslavia split with the Soviet bloc and split with the Soviet Union, which means they didn't want any Eastern films in the cinemas anymore. That includes Polish for a certain period. And they opened up cinemas to Western films, but also needed a certain amount of their local films. Otherwise, it would be all American. So they started to make all kinds of the films they could. And if we are talking about this attempt to make a cinema industry, it's a part of the whole global attempt to modernize rural and primordial society, which means to literarize people, to make them learn to read and write, to vaccination, electrification, urbanization, building an urban settlements in the cities, big blocks of the flats, introducing plastic, introducing television in the late 50s, introducing some amounts of the Western-oriented pop culture, like pop songs, imitating San Remo, festivals, this whole trend of modernization of society, and part of it was having its own cinema. And as every industry, you have to learn how. The same way you have to, as you have to learn how to make plastic, the same way as you have to make how to make I know, atomic energy or electric power plant, you would need to learn how to make a film. They consider it as a part of the industry when you have to acquire technology and skills and knowledge to be able to make it. And part of that was, and when would they take this skill? Who would they look for that skill? So when they are going to look, when Poland needed to make her own car industry, what they did, they go to Fiat and they made a factory in Tichy over here, and they were starting to make Polski Fiat. It works the same way. It works the same way with the cinema. Where would you? We need to go to those people who know how to make films, which means Hollywood, which means West. And sorry. And in the 50s, new nascent classic Yugoslav studio system imitates systematically Hollywood and Western commercial films in many aspects. Part of that is maybe, it's anecdotal explanation, but it works. Part of that is related to a personal taste of the Yugoslav dictator of that time, Josip Tito, who was a huge fan of Westerns. He loved Westerns. He had private cinema, and they're showing him 2 Westerns every evening. And he loved Westerns, and he loved when the Yugoslav films looks like Hollywood films. But there is a rational underline under it. You have to make a film which would work well as a propaganda, but to work well as a propaganda, they have to be good. Otherwise, people wouldn't watch them. So you have to learn skills and make films which would be easy to watch, interesting, entertaining, attractive, and at the same time it would have underlined not too obvious propaganda undercurrent. This is something that started to happen within the 50s, and what is interesting, if you're studying this period in cinema, how consciously and obviously they were imitating Hollywood patterns. For instance, you would find in the film bulletins of that era that famous Hollywood editor, who was of Serbian origin, Slavko Vorkapić, would have essays how the Hollywood is editing the films, how to make this edit working in the local context. You would have the whole line of the films from the 50s and early 60s who were obviously made under the template of the important Hollywood or British films from that period. My favorite thriller, Croatian thriller from the 50s, No okreći se sine, Don't Turn Around by Branko Bauer, was consciously made with the idea to a bit imitate very famous British thriller Odd Man Out by Carol Reed. Odd Man Out was a film about the Irish clandestine fighter who is hiding from the British police on the streets of Belfast. He just took it in the Second World War Zagreb. A man who is part of the resistance, who is from the Germans and Ustaše. You will have Serbian film, Kapetan Leši, Žika Mitrović, who is practically a Western set in the Second World War Kosovo. Kosovo with the Albanian main character, Leši, and totally imitating John Ford. So you have a couple of examples of that kind. If you're talking about this influence of Western, there is one interesting Polish example that I find very, very useful here because it's very similar. I call it Silesia Western. Silesia Western, it's a Prawo i Pięść, if I said it well, by Jerzy Hoffman. It's one of my favorite Polish films, and it's again the film that very well appropriates the Western tropes and put it into local ambient. I think it's Wrocław, is it? It's Silesian setting, and in a way which is very interesting. Also, from that point of view, one of the important genres was thriller. Was a thriller, and especially the thriller which had called film o ilegalcima, film of clandestine illegal fighters who were resistant movement, but not resistant movement in the mountains like Partizani, because but within the city, within the occupied cities, and some of the films in iconography and a whole feeling of fear and remind me of Andrzej Wajda Canal film you probably know, and here are some examples of the thriller legalcima. Couple of them are Veliki Mali, Big and Small is a Serbian example. These two first are Croatian, and for instance, you will have this film Alphabet of Fear by Fadil Hadžić, who is a film about a woman who is a student and participating in the resistance, who is pretending that she is an illiterate servant to come as a servant into a house of the high Ustaše functionary to spy. But one of the perils, she's not supposed to. They are not supposed to find out that she can read, because of the fact that if she is illiterate, she cannot read documents. So it's important that she is illiterate, and she has to pay attention not to give up that she is able to read. So it's kind of the thriller trope. In that period, genre, crime novels or thrillers with the contemporary settings are very, very rare. There are not very many of them. But there is one example which I found all interesting, and it's also filmed by Fadil Hadžić. It's Other Side of the Medal, Druga strana medalje. It's a crime novel with the setting of Rijeka. As you know, Rijeka was in Croatia a bit like Western Silesia here. It's a newly acquired territory, the city which was Italian in between two wars, when everybody from everywhere entering into empty houses and making a new society, which means everybody has some history, but that history is somewhere else. And this is the topic of the crime novel, because there is a woman who is hiding her war past. So I won't tell you more, but it's one of the very rare real crime films in that period, real detective. And what is interesting, and it's also very typical for a communist context, investigator is a journalist, not a policeman. Like here, I guess, in Yugoslavia, there was still hesitance about having policemen as a main character, so they're taking journalist as a main character who discovers the past of that woman, and the setting of Rijeka is used very well, and it's an interesting, underrated film. And the real change, if you're talking about literature, the real change came in the late 70s and early 80s. Now we are talking about totally different social context. First of all, society is fully urbanized. I mean, at that period, more than half of the population live in the bigger cities. Industrialization brought the whole big part of the society into cities. within 25 years of socialism created the very first real massive middle class in Croatia and in Yugoslavia in general. Before that, the middle class was very tiny, very small in numbers and very small in economic power. Now you have a real, proper, massive middle class. People who are buying books, people who are educated. I mean, I'm talking about clerks, engineers, teachers, judges, all the different kind of the educated middle class people who are now acquired a certain economic power, they are a certain education, and now for the first time you have that really massive middle class that you never had until 60s. Because of that breakup between Soviet Union and Yugoslavia at that period was already 20 years totally exposed to the Western culture. We are talking exposed to the Western culture means that people from the early 60s can travel. This is the difference with the other communist countries. And in the cinemas on television, there is Western films, there is British television series, and there is lots of translations, including translations of the important crime writers coming from the West. And within since the whole economic of Yugoslavia was in a way hybrid proto-capitalist communist economy, which worked as a communist economy where we are talking about big systems, energy, banks, and on the lower level it worked on some, let's say, proto-market context, and that proto-capitalist market context included publishing industry, which was fighting for audience and struggling to get the bestsellers. And obviously, if you want to have bestsellers and to sell a book well, you need local bestseller writer. And if you need a local bestseller writer, what would you ask for? You would ask for the local genre writers, people who would write crime novels, thrillers, horrors, stuff like this. Example of this, I would say, proto-capitalist impulse in Croatian publishing industry from the 70s on is one very famous, almost cult line, biblioteka. It was called Hit Biblioteka by a very famous, now it's dead, Croatian editor whose name was Zlatko Crnković, and it was a place where he introduced all kinds of the famous Western bestseller writers, including some Eastern, very good Eastern writers, and it was like a cradle to introduce the local bestseller writers for the audience. Of course, within the context of postmodernistic changes in the late 70s and 80s, the approach to let's say, high and low literature also changed. Which means that you have first serious academic or critic books on crime novel. I'm taking two of them. Poetika kriminalističkog romana by Stanko Lasić is a proper academic work. It's a literature science volume. And Principi krimića, Principles of Crime Novel by Igor Mandić was a book of newspaper essays by, at that time, most popular, almost cult literary critic, magazine literary critic. So, two different literary fields, two authors, both of them writing about crime novel, establishing it as a proper let's say, object of the academic or critic interest. And in that period, obviously, if you are looking for a bestseller crime writers, you find them. You would encourage them to go to that direction, and that period had appeared two writers who would become biggest Croatian bestseller writers of that era, and who were writing not only crime novels, but to a certain extent were involved into crime novels. First of them is Pavo Pavličić, who used to be my professor on comparative literature in Zagreb in the 80s, who started as a crime writer. He had a book of crime stories, Dobri duh Zagreba, the Good Spirit of Zagreb, and his three initial crime novels, Blue Rose, Machine for Fog, and Artificial Eagle, in the late 70s. later on, he moved into a different direction, going to the direction of something I would call his specific mixture of speculative fiction, mystery, and fantastic. Later on, he didn't write crime novels. He moved into different direction. He continued to write genre fiction, but not crime fiction. He is also important as a screenwriter. He was very much adapted for cinema. We're going to talk about it a bit later. And typically, in his crime novels, again, one of two main characters is journalist. You have, again, this trope, which is very typically very Eastern European. The other one, Goran Tribuson, he's a bit younger, but basically same generation, 1948. Again, very popular as a screenwriter. Later, in the last 10 years, he's author of two very popular sitcoms for Croatian television. And worked in a whole variety of genres. He published a couple of horror novels. One of them, Sunken Cemetery, Potrebno groblje from the 90s, a very hardcore sunken horror novel. There are several others. But he published also one whole line of the very popular and very funny and I love them very much, autobiographical humoristic novels dealing with the life of the small provincial city. He's born Bjelovar, it's a small city in the north, who is as a childhood during the socialism. I don't know, it's a bit resembling the writing of the Czech writer who was very popular in Croatia. I don't know whether it was here, Michal Vivek. You don't know, it's not big thing here, Michal Vivek, no. He had these humoristic novels about life in late socialism. In Tribuson's case, it's from the childhood or teenager perspective. There is one of that novel which is very, very lovely. It's called Povijest pornografije, History of Pornography. But what interests us here is his crime novels, which there are many of them, but the most important part of it is the series of the 6 novels with the same main character, and he's the first serial detective in Croatian literature. This investigator is called Nikola Banic. You have these 6 books, starting from 85 to 2004, Peking, Grey Zone, Deeper Side of Bay, Night Shift, Rabbit Foxes, Bitter Chocolate. It's interesting to read that books in a go, because you see the society changing. In the first book, the main character is still an investigator of the communist police. In the late 80s, when for the first time private detectives appeared in still socialist Yugoslavia, he becomes a private detective. And later on, he keeps being later a detective, but the society is going into direction of the young wild capitalism and brutal privatization. And in that period, the crime stories that Nikola Banic is involved get involved into such a type of topics. So in a way, reading these 6 Nikola Banic novels, in a way, it's like a bit like a tour through Croatian society from the communism to this final stage of communism, which is already very hybrid, and up to the wild capitalism in the 90s. I think that's probably most important series of the serialized crime novel in the Croatian literature. It ended in 2004. Maybe a couple of years later, I met Tribuson. I was in Zagreb once, and I met him in the street. I asked him why he's not writing Nikola Banic anymore, and he asked me, there was a very lovely answer. He told me that he cannot write crime novels anymore because he stopped smoking. He said he had heart problems. And he told me, since I don't smoke, I cannot focus on the complicated plots anymore. So his heart condition and the smoking is guilty that we don't have Nikola Banic anymore. They are same generation. They became very popular in the same moment, from the late 70s, early 80s. But as writers, they are very different. They're very different. Pavlicic is he studied Italian, and he's very much into romance studies, and his main influences are Italian and French. Simenon, Leonardo Sciascia, that's the area of the crime novel he starts from. Tribuzon is very much into cinema culture, maybe like me, and his main influence is American hard-boiled novel. Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, I don't know how much do you know about it. The writers were most important crime writers, American, in the 30s and 40s, and influenced very much Hollywood via film noir. Take any film with Humphrey Bogart. It's very usually there are films made based upon their books. So a bit cynical, tough guy, private detective. There is no police. There is very skeptical approach to elite, to rich people. There's very certain amount of the social pessimism. And Tribuzon was very much into it. He even imitates certain tropes of the classic hard-boiled in his. Even one lovely detail: Nikola Dvanić is a huge lover of jazz. He loves Chet Baker and listening to Chet Baker in every novel. That kind of the postmodernist shift happened not only in literature, but with only slight delay, it happened also in cinema. What happened as a part of the same kind of the poetic change happened what we sometimes call in Croatia novožanrovski film, new genre cinema. This means consciously postmodernistic, intertextually based film, when you're making a genre film, being totally aware of the tradition you belong. And they very much used to use the Pavličić and Tribuzon as a source material. Of those directors, there are several of them, but in my opinion, only one is really important. This is Zoran Tadić. He died. Who made a couple of films based on Pavličić's screenplays. Rhythm of the Crime, Ritam Zločin. It's the first film of all that group, and it's based on a Pavo Pavličić short story, which itself is very much inspired by one crime story by Jorge Luis Borges, La Muerte y la Brújula. The death and the compass. So it's a very postmodernistic conscious film. In other films become more social. They are becoming more involved into society. A good example is Third Key, Treći ključ. It's a film about a young couple who gets an apartment from the company, like you know, in socialism, like here, you would at some point when you were working into some company or factory, you would get an apartment. They're entering into a new apartment, but during the film, you realize there was something murky about it. He pulled some connections to get first on the list, which he was not supposed to be. So there was kind of the maneuver to get him the apartment faster than he was supposed to be, and then you have a fantasy plot. At some point, third key of the apartment is missing, and someone is entering their apartment while they are not here, but he doesn't steal anything. He only moves things, he only doing mysterious stuff, but someone is having a third key. So in a way, you are using a Kafkaesque metaphor and crime novel to do something which is related with social criticism. It's very typical for a Tadić movie. They're also very much interconnected with Hollywood tradition. For instance, you have this film Convicted, Osuđeni, which is basically a rewriting of one very famous American film from the 50s, Cape Fear, by J. Lee Thompson. There is a man who was convicted unjustly, prison, and he kidnaps the prosecutor, the judge, and the witness, and drags them into distant farm somewhere in the countryside to be his prisoners now. So it's very much looks like this film. That film Cape Fear was after remade by Martin Scorsese in the 90s with Robert De Niro, but the original version from the 50s and is very much inspired by the original version. Tadić's trajectory was very typical. He was a film critic at the beginning. He was a member of that group of the critics who were called Hitchcockians, because they adored Hitchcock, and they're introducing the genre criticism in Yugoslav and Croatian film criticism. It was in the early 60s. And at some point, this kind of reevaluation of the genre cinema became dominant, and he enters as a film director. This kind of the trend is very much at the same time and the same ideology and the same pattern with things that happen in American cinema in the 80s. If you know films like directors like Walter Hill, John Carpenter, McTiernan, there's a new genre cinema which comes back to the tradition of the classic genre, but introduces it with the modern tropes, modern topics, modern ideology. So it very much looks like that. This is the situation when we are coming up to the 1990s. At that moment, Croatian cinema, genre cinema, literary cinema is very postmodernistic, very conscious, very market-oriented. But then we are going, but in a society which is still not very criminalized. But now we are coming into a completely new context when things change. Generally, war in Croatia made a huge shift in literature, meaning that up to the early 90s, Croatian general fiction was generally very postmodernistic and very oriented into fantasy, metafiction, experiment. So there was, it was very much detached from the realistic writing, which was considered at that time as something old-fashioned, 19th century, a bit pathetic. With war, everything changes. Everything changes in a way that suddenly reality is so rich. Rich not in a good way, but it is so. Every man's destiny suddenly seems to be important. There is so many stories. There are so many important things that happen in the social reality. Suddenly, literature is turning back into naturalism, turning back into realism. On the many aspects. One of them is an enormous production of autobiographical novels and memoirs. I mean, I could find that I think there are at least 100 or 200 war memoirs written in Croatia, written by people who never write before or would never write later. So this was a huge production of such things. Coming to the novels, fictional novels, which would deal with war in the city, war on the battlefield, war on every different aspects of war. Then, obviously, society is fully criminalized. There is no more the drunkard by the fence. Every crime is everywhere, starting from the war crimes, obviously, and up to the economic crimes, brutal privatization, corruption in the weapon smugglings, corruption into privatization. So crime is everywhere. Crime becomes a central topic of all newspapers. So obviously, you would expect that the crime novel would become also central. Also, at that period, this change of canon, when genre is not anymore trivial, when genre is not anymore something which is low, is completely final. It's already established that the crime novel is established as a part of the literary canon. So, also, industry is obviously now part of the capitalist economy. You sell books, you live out of selling books. So it seems that all preconditions for a crime novel are there. How does it look? In the early years, I again have a good Polish reference, in cinema at least. It's a film that I like a lot, Psi by Władysław Kowalski, which is talking about this transition of the communist apparatus into early stage of organized crime, and I think it's fascinating that he made a film such fast. It was only 2 years after the fall of Berlin Wall. He's already responded with a very good crime film with this topic, and this character of man who is of former regime who becomes a policeman wants to be a good policeman, but that nobody believes him. very much inspired one of the main characters in my book, Červona voda. It's interesting that this film was translated in Croatian distribution, Policajac iz bivšeg režima, policeman from former regime. It was like a title for of the book, of the film when it was screened on television. You would expect that the crime novel would thrive, but it didn't happen. It's very mysterious, but it really didn't happen. I might presume there could be several reasons why. One of them is that Croatian society is slightly auto-colonial, which means that that the readers who are now completely into the arena of the Western capitalist market publishing industry are slightly suspicious to local writers. This is one of the things that are very different in Croatia and in Serbia. In Serbia, audience loves local films and local books. In Croatia, not that so. So they are a bit suspicious. Oh, now when we can buy whatever we want from the West, why would I buy a Croatian writer? Second reason is a certain amount of literary colonialism, which you would become very aware when you are writing crime novels in a small, relatively marginal literature like Croatian. I mean, we are talking about a situation when you have certain ideas, what are you buying from where? Like if you're buying a car, you are going to buy a German car. If you are going to Indian reservation, you are going to buy necklaces, stuff like this. If you're going to Croatia as a tourist, you are going to buy lavender or I don't know, olive oil. You're not going to buy a car. It's in a way it works a bit in a literary market. If you are Balkan writers or Eastern European writers, there is a certain niche you are covering. You have to write war stories, historic novels, family sagas, autofiction. It's kind of the field you are supposed to cover because this is something that Eastern Europeans should do. It's kind of the niche. On the other way, if someone is looking for a crime novel, he's going for a Scandinavian or Anglo-Saxon. And it's when I'm always saying when I'm talking about what I am doing that I was okay. You're buying German cars and you're buying Indian necklaces, but I'm Indian and I want you to buy my car. So that's the idea of, when I keep telling everywhere, not only in Poland, that go against this kind of the stereotype and to do genre novel within this literature which is not generally known for a genre crime novel literature. Also, if that is so, which means that as a writer, you're often pragmatical. If I want to be translated, I'm going to write that kind of fiction which would find a publisher abroad. Which means this is not going to be a crime novel. It's going to be kind of the highbrow literature which is typically accepted from a Balkan or Eastern European writer. And that's something that, and it's in a way it's a counterintuitive. You would say, okay, if you're a writer, you're going to write crime novels because you would find more audience, so which means you're going to be translated more. No, it doesn't work that way. You would be translated more if you are working within the mainstream literature, which is expected from the Balkan or Eastern European writer. If you are writing a crime novel, then you are going into the territory which is supposed to be for the others, and it could be communication problems at some point. This is and of course, we are talking about literary field. Typically, prizes, residencies, awards usually don't go to genre writers, to horror writers, thriller writers, crime writers. All the reasons created the atmosphere in which it was not very profitable to do, and it was not viable to do to make a crime novel, and at the same time, it's difficult. It's a difficult job. It's a difficult job. It requires certain knowledge, certain skills to make a good crime novel. The final problem still exists, and it's a part of, and I'm going to talk about it later, is a problem of representation of justice and law. Because you have to be aware that Societies which generally write most of the crime novels and which generally read most of the crime novels, like Scandinavian, British, to a certain extent French, are societies with a strong confidence into public sector and justice system. I mean, if you read a crime novel or if you watch a crime novel film, you would actually have to believe that police is decent people who are doing their best effort, who are underpaid but nevertheless brave and competent. At some point they would catch the bad guy and there's going to be a happy end. This idea of the stable society with a strong confidence to public sector is something that does not exist in Croatia. I'm not sure about Poland, but in Croatia it does not exist. It's counterintuitive for Croatian audience. Croatian audience believes that the police is, there are somebody, nephews who were employed by a ruling party, they are incompetent, they are corrupt, they are not doing her job well. But policemen is even good compared to what the people think about judges, and which judges consider as the worst oncological problem of the Croatian societies. And in that cases, the whole idea of the policier, of the police novel, the whole idea of the crime novel and the whole happy end is very much something that people would question while reading a book. And this is something that you need to pay attention about. Despite this, especially in the 2010s, there is a whole scene of the new fiction, both audiovisual and literary, which reactivate the genre in last 10-15 years. One example I like a lot is my colleague journalist, Drago Hedl. He's an investigative journalist from Osijek. It's a city on the northeast by Hungarian and Serbian border. He made this, in my opinion, very good Osijek trilogy, three interconnected books, Electoral Silence, Confessional Secret, and Kiev Chicken. Third one is Kiev because it's related to trafficking of the women from Ukraine. And they were made to the TV series, which I don't like much. I like novels more. And he, in my opinion, it's something that is worth being translated if someone is interested in genre Christian. Bit edgy example. It's not totally crime novel, but in my opinion, fantastic books. Two books by a writer whose name is Christian Novak. He's from far north, Međimurje. It's an area around, by the Slovenian-Hungarian border, which is specific for two reasons. There is a big Roma minority, and second one, there is a very heavy dialect, which even I don't understand, and he's using it a lot in the books. This book, Cigaran Lebše, Most Beautiful Gypsy from 2016, in my opinion, is probably the best crime novel written in Croatia in the last 20-25 years, maybe even. Only it's a rather huge book. It's very big, and it's shifting with different dialects, changing different dialects, so it's not easy to translate, but a fantastic book. And there is another book which published recently, A Case of Self-Affliction, which is kind again on the edge of it's not crime in a most proper way. And another example that you are able to read to watch on Netflix if you are subscribed on Netflix. It's a television series Paper, Novine, written by my colleague Ivica Đikić, journalist and writer, and director by Dalibor Matanić. It's 4 seasons of the mixture of crime novel and political thriller, evolving around a big newspaper, daily newspaper in Rijeka again. In Rijeka again, it's a good example of how of the social chronic from the point with crime elements within the television series. It reminds me a bit, not totally, but it's a bit another Silesian example. It's a television series that I watched also on Netflix, Roist by Jan Holubeck. With it, probably you know it. It has this series has certain similarities with with this Polish example. Okay? So we have exceptions, but all these exceptions, and me included, have to deal with the typical problems of contemporary Eastern European crime writer. First problem is how to write police in a society that does not exactly trust police too much. I mean, how to avoid this police to be too Americanized, too idealized, how to have a convincing depiction of institutions. You have often, at least in Croatia, you have often television series and films that institutions work like a totally copy-pasted from American films. Attorneys are like American attorneys, policemen are like, institutions in different societies work a different way. There is a different protocol of communication. There is a different legislative framework. If you're writing a crime novel, you have to know who is deciding that someone is going to be detained, let's say, and for how long. What is the procedure if you want to tap someone's phone? How this procedure works? Who is deciding? What's the scope of the competence, scope of the authority of the police, and when the authority of the attorneys? That's something that you have to know because it's very specific, and it's very specific for different societies. These dynamics changes from Croatian society to Polish society to American society. You cannot just copy-paste American or British crime procedure and put it in Croatia. It doesn't work that way. How to make a realistic of relations between institutions, police, attorneys, judges, media. Do you even want to have a police as a main character? I mean, typically, main character in crime novels is typically policemen. This is the reason why the whole genre in France is called policier. Policier. When I got one of the prizes in France, I got a prize for le prix de la littérature policier. But in Redwater, there is very little police. There is very little police only in the early stage. Do you want to avoid police? To have journalists like Pavičicia and Tribuson were doing in his books. For instance, I used that trope in my last book, which I published 2 months ago, Mouthful of Sea, where I have a retired journalist as someone who is investigating because his ex-girlfriend asked him to. If you have police, you have to know police. You have to try to not depict it too romantically, but at least with certain element of knowledge. Second question, maybe more important, is how to write a happy end in a society which does not exactly believe in happy end. I mean, the happy end is always ideological statement. You say, by definition, justice is going to prevail. This is something that I can't sell to a Croatian audience. They look too often big guys getting by, being unpunished, getting a very small sentence or no sentence at all. So this is something that I have in mind, that this kind of I'm not sure whether it exists even anymore in American society. It's very questionable that after Black Lives Matter, after all that happened, that you are going to have this totally romanticized idea of the policeman. But in Croatia, it basically never existed. So how to have a happy end, which would sound phony and wrong to your audience, and at the same time, how to not have a happy end, because happy end is an element of pleasure. Happy end is, if someone is reading a crime novel, he's reading it because of a certain pleasure you want to. So happy end is part of the pleasure. By measuring how much of the happy end we are going to have you are defining your ideology. To have, maybe you could have, like I do often, have something that is not happy end on the public level, but could be small, private, tiny happy end on the level of the main character. He's happy by himself. He did something for himself, which is well, but in a society as a whole is rotten. So measuring happy end is a part of the crime novel, which is most important as a ideological statement about society. Third question is, how to avoid Americanization. How to avoid that you are not imitating too strongly pre-existing templates. And if we are talking pre-existing templates, I'm not talking only about, I'm talking about institutions, society, the way how the institutions work, how they function, but also I'm talking about the type of characters, all different of interpersonal dynamics, how the family works, how the newspaper works, how the media work, how the working people who you work with on the job, how this dynamic works. It's all very different in different societies. Also, type of crime. Also type of crime. There are type of crimes you have in American or British novels that are impossible in Croatia, and vice versa. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was reading in newspapers, and I've encountered on the article in the newspapers that there was a murder in Athens, in Greece, that someone who was driving a motorcycle with a casket get there and killed near by the doors of his house a man who was a geometrist. What is the Polish word for that? Geometer. Because he was involved into some murky business about the real estate on some of the Greek islands. It doesn't work as an American crime novel, but it would perfectly work as a beginning of the Croatian crime novel. Because if you have the whole economy is around real estate, if you have that the whole crime is around real estate, then if someone is killing a geometer, it's a good beginning of the Greek crime novel or Croatian crime novel. Maybe I would write that novel at some point. That idea is somewhere here to me. But the point is, it could work in Croatia, it could work in Greece. I'm not sure whether it would work in Poland or in Britain. So societies are different. That means the crimes are different. That means that the crime novel has to be homegrown. Has to be. It's a bit like wine. It comes from the terroir. It comes from the very local soil, and has to be local in a way that you cannot just move the same plant into different climate zone and into different society and make it work. It has to come from below, come from the specific society, specific institutions, specific crimes, and specific crimes come from the specific economics. Also, it includes that you are supposed to have very rich local context. This is, as a film critic and as a writer, I always, and as a reader, maybe more important, I always like the books which are in parallelly good fiction and documentary about a certain world. When I can find out what people eat, food is very important because food is also element of characterization. Rich people don't eat like poor people eat. People from the mountains don't eat like people from the city. Younger people don't eat like old people eat. If you put food, you put in characterization. Also, family dynamics, relations between family members. We are talking about Southern society, Mediterranean society, when the family links are terribly strong. Half of the crimes in Croatia are because someone is someone's brother or someone is someone's nephew, or we have to, people in Croatia are very much attached to 3 big social networks. One of them is family. Second one is neighborhood. This is where people in Croatia rarely move. They don't like to change address because you are losing total network, all the networks. Oh, the guy from the 2nd floor, he knows the surgeon who is going to do my orthopedic surgery, and the guy for the 4th floor, he would paint my kitchen. This is the whole network depends on the neighbors. And if you move, you lose everything. And third important element of this network is what we call zemljak. Zemljak. The Italians would call it paesan. Someone who is from your countryside, someone who is from your area. in Croatia, it's culturally even more specific because if you're talking about Dinaric line up to the south, to the seaside, family names are very local. Families are very local. They are very specifically, geographically very specific, which means that at the moment you're shaking someone's hand and say your family name, he would probably know from where are you. He would know, oh, you are from around Imotski. You are from Island Hvar. My family name is from Island Hvar because my grandfather was born there. And when I shake someone, I say, oh, you must be either from Lika or from Hvar. Because there's only two places in Croatia where my family name, although it's very banal. Pavičić is, as you know, son of the Pavel. But anyway, it's very local, which means you're very much dependent, you're very much conditioned by your paisan, by your zemljaci. All these relations have something to do with the crime, because you would cover someone's crime, you would get involved into some murky business. This is something that works in Croatia. It doesn't work in American crime novel. It doesn't work in French or British crime novel. This kind of the specific elements makes crime novel locally convincing. Because, as I said, crime novel is like a wine. It has to grow from the below, from the terroir of the society. You cannot translate it from one society to another. And the last problem you are going to deal is how to avoid mechanisms of self-colonization, which means two opposite things. One of them is that you not, as I said, that you are not imitating America's Scandi templates and just translate it into your society, because it's not going to work. But there is another problem which you have to be aware, that you should not work as someone who is perpetuating the stereotypes about your own society, which help you sell the books abroad, which means it's something that, I mean, cultural studies, it's called, I think, native informant, is it? Someone who is from within some culture and who is explaining it to the outsiders. I think it's called native informant. And you have to be very careful, because otherwise you would end up in a loop of the stereotypes being accepted and welcomed, and then creating new stereotypes. And in this loop, you are going to become popular abroad, but you are going to become irritating to your audience, because he sees it as a phony, he sees it as a easy sell. So you are in between two perils. And generally, all these questions are questions that you have to answer by yourself, and you have to think about when you're writing a crime novel or thriller in Croatia. And in my opinion, same if you're writing a crime novel or thriller, or making a crime thriller film in Poland. I think it's same. It should be same. In Poland, the only easiest way is that you are 40 million audience, so which means society, the demographic, which means that you can sell enough books and you can sell enough cinema tickets from within Poland. You are not that much dependent on the what's going to think people who's going to think abroad. But anyway, all these questions are questions that you have to ask from one book to another, from one film to another, if you're making a crime or thriller fiction in both Poland and both Croatia. And in my books, what I was trying to do all the time was trying to answer to these questions the way I thought it has to be answered. And whether I succeeded or not, it's up to you. So, thank you. If you have any questions and details and anything you are interested in extra.
Dziękujemy bardzo za ten znakomity, fascynujący wykład. Oczywiście, jak zawsze, po wykładzie jest możliwość zadawania pytań, także bardzo Państwa zachęcam do wykorzystania tej wyjątkowej sytuacji. Myślę, że w Polsce do tej pory nikt nie miał okazji wysłuchać wykładu na temat literatury i filmu gatunkowego, a mianowicie kryminałów, A tutaj mamy wyjątkową okazję, ponieważ dr Jurica Pavičić jest i teoretykiem, i praktykiem. Także przedstawiłem go od tej strony jego działalności, powiedzmy, naukowej. Bardzo Państwa przepraszam, zawsze mnie zjada trema w takich sytuacjach, ale powinienem jeszcze na początku zwrócić uwagę, że również ma doświadczenie dydaktyczne, dlatego że jest wykładowcą na Akademii Sztuk w Splicie i prowadzi tam zajęcia z zakresu scenariopisarstwa. Uczy po prostu studentów pisać scenariusze, także dodaję to tytułem uzupełnienia do tych informacji, które pojawiły się na początku, a bardzo szczegółowo przedstawimy go o 18:00, ponieważ poświęciliśmy trochę czasu na przeprowadzenie śledztwa, także mam nadzieję, że Państwo znajdą czas i przyjdą jeszcze o 18:00. A teraz zachęcam do stawiania pytań. Można pytać po polsku, my przetłumaczymy, można pytać po angielsku, także zapraszam.
And sorry if I was talking too fast. I'm Dalmatian, so I got lost myself. I'm not sure whether I was too fast for you.
Proszę się nie wstydzić. Proszę zaczekać, dam mikrofon. Chyba że woli Pani bez mikrofonu. Pani Marta Zakład.
Yeah, like you said, there are some things like, for example, how you said the matter of the police, that they are changing. Like you said, these things that happens in the USA, and I was wondering, when it comes to these changes, is there, okay, how do I want to put this in words? No, I want to talk in English because then I can practice it. When we talk about the Croatian, I don't know how it looks like because I live in Poland, and of course I have a little knowledge of these things, but the society, how it looks in the cities and how the outside, because like you said, there are just these connections, like one person knows that person because that person is a friend of that person, and so on. But I do know that in Poland we have something similar, but it looks different in the cities and in the outer cities. Like in the cities, especially I think younger people know less and have these lesser connections. Therefore, the society is a lot more, I believe, this is my opinion, of course, is isolated. And therefore...
You meaning isolated from the family and from the countryside?
Yeah, but also from each other. Therefore, there comes like these things like internet and these new problems that the crime also can sneak in. And I was wondering how to work with it when it comes
I mean, the way I work with it is that I don't have that much young characters anymore because I grew older. I had it before. I mean, I was able to write about teenagers when my son was a teenager. He's not anymore. And now, in a way, one of the things that I always poking fun with my editor in Croatia is that how I'm getting older, my characters are getting older. One of the it's a bit creepy and it's a bit sounds a bit alarming that in my last two books main characters are people who are retired. So it sounds that my fiction is growing older, but yeah, I mean. If you are not very much into teenagers or young people and this whole social media landscape, which I'm not, you have to try to explore it, to investigate it, like everything else. I mean, when I was writing Červona voda, I had no problems with some aspect. I mean, I knew war because I was in war, so I had no problems writing a war chapter. I had no problems writing a war about writing a chapter about real estate machination on the seaside because I wrote about it as a journalist a lot, so I knew the topics. But I have one chapter which is taking place on the merchant ship. I need to have a character on the merchant ship. Something has to happen there. I have to know how it works with the crew, how it works with the chain of command, how it works with the. So I found someone who knows that. I happen to have a cousin. Who is a machinist who used to be a machinist on the merchant ship for years, and he told me, he gave me a thorough introduction into it and helped me to write the chapter. Same, now it's not my last, it's my pre-last book, which is called Matches, like zapalni. I needed to find how people investigate the fireplace, somewhere the huge fire. I asked policemen. Policemen told me, I have no idea. That's not our job. That's not what we do. We have no slightest idea how it's done. And found a guy who helped me. He found me 2 PDFs of the one magisterial work and one just about this, and I used it. So I presume if I have to write teenagers, I would just go and do the research. I would find some teenager and he would ask him lots of questions, and that's the way. That's the way we are dealing with something that you don't know. Because in a crime novel, if you don't know something, it's immediately obvious. For some mysterious reason, a reader immediately knows that. Even if he doesn't know, but he would immediately know that you don't know. I don't know how, but it's something in the text that gives you a feeling of the confidence that you immediately notice that if it does not exist.
Mamy jeszcze jedno pytanie, pani Małgorzata Troska.
Thank you. I've got a question because I was thinking about the main aim about your creation. I was reading the Red Water, Czerwona Woda, and it was a really good crime story with very surprising ending, in my opinion. But I was also thinking, because you show the transformation of Croatia, of the region, the history, but also you show the transformation of the people characters. It was your main aim to show the all the transformation in this area at that times, or it was by accident? You know, it should be just a crime story and
it's something in between. I mean, that's something we are going probably to talk this afternoon when we promote the books. My idea was always to have a initial traumatic event that hits people and they changes their destinies, that their destinies go into different directions. They are different as they would be otherwise. I'm always using a metaphor of the billiard pool table. Yeah. A billiard pool table. So if you hit first, take a stick, you hit the first ball, first ball hit the second ball, and out of the sudden all the balls are like this. And I wanted my characters that way to work that way. So for such a thing, what I needed a broader geographical. I wanted to be scattered all around from China Sea to Toronto. And I needed a longer time span, lots of time, 20-something years. And okay, if I was a Swiss writer, these 20-something years would not be very exciting years. I mean, in terms of political change. But in Croatia, they are. And you have an end of communism, a breakup of Yugoslavia, you have war, you have a post-war touristic avalanche, gold rush, and you had a big real estate crisis in 2008, which hit Croatia very, very heavily because the whole economy was depending on real estate. And obviously, it appears as in the second plan, as something that is on the background. I want it to be background, but I found it interesting to have this difference between background and the foreground. For my characters, problems, which their personal problem, family problem, is so big. Everything that is important to all the others is secondary to them. But it's vice versa. For everyone else, the big problems are that big. Who cares about some girl who is missing? So they not get the attention of the others because everybody is so focused on the bigger picture. And this discrepancy, this this shift in between what is important to them and what is important to everybody else, it's something that I wanted to have in the book. But the idea of Červona voda was not to be a social chronicle as itself. It's background.
Thank you so much.
Czy są jeszcze jakieś pytania? Będą aktywności, zapytania dla grup artystycznych. To można aż 3 zgromadzić dzisiaj. Aha, pan profesor Rafał Borysławski.
Sorry, I'm sorry to be taking the floor, but if any one of you wishes to ask a question, please, I would happily, yield the microphone. But if I have, several questions that were sort of the result of your very inspiring talk, in which you combined, several things, the history of, the Croatian literature in many respects, film, yes, and then aspects of creative writing or fiction writing. We can tell that you teach fiction writing or crime fiction writing. So my question, one question is whether the points that you were so eloquently presenting at the very end, which really were like the kind of how to write good crime fiction, yes, or maybe how to write good fiction. How conscious you were of these very points as you worked on your novels, or whether you devised them, whether they were the effect of your fiction writing or creative writing? Yeah.
Writing novel, like every writing, is about making. You make decision. You are going to the crossroad, whether I'm going to left or whether I'm going to right. So you have to decide things. And when you start making decisions, either you're doing it intuitively, which I don't, either you think about it. And when you start thinking about it, you obviously these things come to mind. So you start thinking about, reflecting about the context of the decision you are going to make. And so in a way it goes, this is something that that goes with the process. When I'm writing, I inevitably start thinking about this. But it's not that, I'm going to write a novel which is going to be avoiding something. But during the work, you necessarily make decisions, and then these decisions are in a way answer to these questions.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for this. And a second question, if I may, a quick one. You spoke about, the fact that Croatian literature or crime fiction is kind of enclosed within Croatia, yes, and we know that your novels, or this one at least, have been translated into French and English, and they won prizes. But I wonder whether the Croatian authors, yes, are in any way read outside Croatia, but within the countries of the former Yugoslavia. Some similarity when you spoke of the workings of the police, yes, or the kind of suspiciousness about the corruption, they certainly would ring some bells in other post-Yugoslav countries.
In post-Yugoslav countries, I mean, we are talking about, when we talk about post-Yugoslav, we are talking about 2 different markets. One of them is the market of these 4 countries which are mutually intelligible, that we don't translate. Meaning Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, and Montenegro, which our books are generally released regularly. From practical reasons, I have different publisher in Croatia and Serbia, but because of the Schengen, of the customs office, one is European and one is not, but they publish the same text every day. Typically, we publish date by date in Croatia and Serbia by 2 different publishers. And of course, some of us are more popular in Serbia, some of them are not, but we generally get distributed. In Slovenia, I got translated, but problem in Slovenia, it's a very small market where people who are interested in that kind of the fictions can read Croatian. Which means a big part of my audience is going to read, I had a very funny anecdote this summer. They have a Ministry of Culture, Asta Vrečko, who is very green left-wing, and he published on the Facebook that she's on the Croatian beach on holidays reading my book in Croatian. And he put it on Facebook. She's reading in Croatian and she's 36, 37. She's not someone who was in Yugoslavia. So in a way, it's eating a big part of the audience for them. So unfortunately, in a way, we lost Macedonia. Macedonia is very small, relatively poor. You have to translate. and for them it's very expensive. And I have 2 books in Macedonia, but it's not something that is generally, and it's geographically far. So in a way we lost the cultural connection with Macedonia. And regarding the other countries, I think that Croatian fiction is kind of translated much more in the last 10 years than it used to be before. Before it was very, very obscure. Now when I go to France and every new bookshop I see 4 or 5 Croatian books. It was not like that before. So in a way it's changing for better. But one of the reasons is the fact I think we have better writers than before. It's not only, I mean magical change. I think we have better writers than we used to in like 20 years ago. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Są jeszcze jakieś pytania? I would ask you to maybe recommend us. Of course, you are the best author of the crime novels, so we should read first your books. But if you could recommend us 2 or 3 authors of crime novels, good novels from Croatia, and maybe a film, crime film we should watch.
In a way, I did it like here. I mean, I would recommend Drago Hedl's Osijek trilogy. They're good, very much orthodox than mine. They're very standard, very good orthodox crime novels, similar to Scandinavian, you know, in some aspects. Also, Gypsy, but most beautiful by Christian Novak. It's a fantastic book.
To jest przetłumaczone.
And I'm not sure whether it's translated. You know.
Yes, it is translated in Polish.
It's not an orthodox crime novel, but it's a very, very good book. And I think it's something that I would recommend the most. And regarding the film, besides some television series, I'm not sure what to from the recent production. I would have to think a bit.
Okay. No mam nadzieję, że Państwo zasmakowali tego, co nas czeka o godzinie 18, bo to był tylko wstęp, a o 18 to się dopiero zacznie dziać. Także serdecznie Państwa zapraszam. Dziękuję za obecność, dziękuję za pytania i oczywiście thanks a lot to Juricy Pavičicia for your lecture. See you at 6 o'clock.